All right, so that is enough classical music for a day. So if you have followed me on Instagram, you might have noticed that there is lots of different digital art pieces on my channel. And you asked quite a lot of questions how I did it, and you wanted a tutorial about it. So I actually sat down and recorded everything for you. So today you will be learning how to do a procedural system to model all these spheres and the assets all together. And then we will be going into shading using Arnold and lighting. And after all that is rendered and set up, we will be going into new compositing to do some lens effects, some grading, and just minor adjustments to make it even more realistic. So I hope you're looking forward for today's tutorial, and let's just get going. Alright, so we are on the latest Houdini, so let's just jump in here and create a geo node, hit F2 to rename it to gallery, and jump in here by hitting enter. Then we create our rubber toy, and we create a null just to have a starting point, and just create that right there, hit F2 and rename it to asset, which is our main object, which we want to work with. So what you're going to do next is create a point separation, so it's called a points from volume. This gives us points within the object in a uniform fashion, so we have rows and columns for this. Next up, what I want to do is create a sphere on the left, and then I use a copy to point sub to copy those spheres to all those unique points. Then we get this kind of blob of spheres. I want to make sure that our scale is maybe 0.02, so we have a nicer size of those individual spheres. So I just want to select those and hit Shift O to create a little box around it, and just rename this maybe to styro balls, like this. And then we want to create a grid, which is essentially there to get our vertical lines going. So I'm just creating a grid like this, and I'm dragging over this the same points from volume node and connecting that to this. So now we have this unique group of points. What I want to make sure, I want to copy this main attribute point separation and paste it to our points from on the second points of volume here. Paste it as a relative reference to have a nice connection between those two subs here. And next up, what I want to do then is use a VDB from particles down here to create a volume around those blobs. And I will use this as my bounds around our points from volume object. And to actually get this to work little bit better, what I want to do is create a point wrangle, and I want to iterate over all of these points like that. I want to squash them into the vertical axis. So all I got to do is hit add p.y to access the y attribute per point, and I just want to set that to 0 just by doing it like that. So now everything is nice and flush with the ground. What I want to do is create a fuse, which essentially just merges those points together. So before we do have 900 points, and after we have 180. So then we do the VDB from particles, and we get the same blob here. I want to change the point radius scale. You can see that we have a different size multiplier for our bounds. What I want to do next is create a group and hook up our VDB to the second input and our main object to the first input. This allows me to create a group with a bounding volume. And make sure you are on points. Make sure you name it to maybe keeper, and then disable the base group, and then enable keep inbound regions, and change the type to be from volume. And you can now see we have this nice object selected here. And we can easily change the scale now by just using this point radius scale. Then we do a blast, like so. And then we just want to keep the keepers by inverting this by delete non-selected. So now we have this a little bit larger grid than this grid, which is exactly what we need, because now we will be duplicating this to create the top segment to create these nice vertical lines. To do that, we need to ensure that both points, or all the points, have a unique ID. So what I want to do, create another point wrangle right after everything, and then it's quite simple. We just want to create an ID attribute by hitting I for integer, add ID, and the value will be at ptnum, which is the current point number. So each particle has a unique number, which is now stored as the ID attribute. After that, I just want to create a copy and transform after this, and now we just want to move those base points upwards by just translating them maybe 3 units upwards. And you can see now we have this kind of same grid at the top and bottom. What I then want to do is create an add sub, which is meant to create points, but instead of using points, I want to create polygons, and by changing the type from pattern to group, and the add method should be by attribute, and the attribute is the one we just created, which is ID, which then gives me these nice vertical lines. What I want to do then is create a poly wire to give them some thickness so the renderer will be happy. So poly wire, look at that and change maybe the radius to 0.025, and we get these nice, very thin kind of lines, which is exactly what I want. And then let's just combine these by selecting both nodes, clicking Alt, click and drag from those output points and merge them together. So now you can see we have these points right there floating at the bottom. What I want to do though is I want to make sure that they are always in the center. So there's a quite nifty node, it's called axis align. We just drop it to the points here and we want to select our poly wire or our add here, or even we can go from the copy, it doesn't matter. And then just make sure that this value in the match axis is set to justify y in center. And now it's always in the center of those two groups here, which is already looking quite nicely. Maybe it change the size a bit so we can see those spheres a little bit better. All right, so the next part would be maybe just store this, Shift O, and call this threads or lines, whatever, which is there to create these vertical lines. And the next one would be to create the box where these threads are actually connected to. And it's quite easy, to be honest. So we will be starting off from our point wrangle here. And what I want to do is create a bound node, which essentially creates a box around a object. And right now it's a plane, so that's why it's so freaking out here. But we want to do an upper padding maybe of 0.4, which gives us a nice thick base. And we also want to make sure that our base box has some kind of padding on the sides too. So the lower padding, let's maybe make it 0.25, and we just copy this value over in all those sides as well, like that. So now the box is essentially a little bit larger. And we do the same trick as we did before. We want to do another axis align from our box to our copy. Let's see, and this would be, the justify should be maximum. So now the box at the top, and we do have a box at the bottom. So let's just select those, Alt, click and drag from those points, and now we have those merged together. Connect this to my bottom merge node. We can now see that we have the boxes in place, and everything is nice and centered. So let's say we want to change the height of those things. So all we got to do now is go into the copy node here and change the height. And you can see everything is nicely scaling with it. So maybe go to 4 for now, leave it like that. And this is the basic shape, right? So next up, what we want to do here is maybe add some kind of variation to everything. So right now the boxes are quite bland and uniform. So what we're going to do here is create a subdivide node just to add divisions to everything. Let's see. So right now it's obviously smoothing it, but we want to change the algorithm to bilinear. And then we probably want to increase the depth maybe to 5 to get nice equal detail here. And then we want to do a mountain operator just to break up our shapes. The default is way too much for what we want to do. We can have some kind of roughness, maybe like that. But then obviously we want to reduce the height to be very, very subtle, just to break up the edges, just that it's a bit broken up and not a perfect box. Think of it as a paper box or something like that. And the same thing applies to our copy to points. Right now, everything is very, very perfect aligned. So in real life, humans do it and they are not always perfect. So what we want to do is create a point jitter, hook it up here, and obviously we do want to change the axis. So we don't want to change X and Z, we just want to adjust the Y axis, and that's why I'm setting those to 0. And now we have a vertical point jitter. We can change the scale by this, and so you just want to do it very gentle, maybe something like that, just to break it up a tiny bit. And we probably can do offset them on the X and Z axis as well, but just a very small amount, maybe 0.1, should do the trick. So there's a slight jitter, which is perfect. It's great. And then we wanted to create an attribute randomize, which gives us a random point size as well. Right now it's defaulting to CD, changing the color. I just want to change the type to P scale. That way you can see we have smaller and larger spheres. We might want to make sure we just want to change one dimension, and we probably don't want to go all the way down to 0. We want to maybe stop at 0.8. So now we have a 20% difference in those two sphere sizes. So now let's see what we are getting with this together. And okay, let's say we want to change the density of those points. We want to have a bit more detail. So all we have to do now is go to the point from volume and change the point separation maybe to 0.05. And you can see everything about this is aligned and updated. So we have way more points now. You can see our rubber toy is nicely detailed, and all the points are still aligned quite nicely. I think 0.05 is a bit much. Maybe go 7.5. Like that. And we can also increase our point size, maybe by 0.25 to get a little bit larger spheres. And this is essentially that. So now let's test our procedural system here by just hooking up a different kind of geometry. Let's use a pig head. So if I pick that and drop it, you can see everything is updating automatically. Even the box sizes change. If I switch back to our flip, you can see it's nicely updating, and we have all these different kind of objects in here. If you find that there's too much space around it, you can change the VDB from particle radius, maybe reduce it to 0.15. Okay, that was too much, maybe 0.2. But yeah, you can see how nicely and procedural this system is. And this is essentially the modeling part. So now let's get into the shading and into the lighting part, which I know lots of you guys enjoyed. So let's just jump into that. Alright, before we getting into the shading and lighting side of things, I just want to make sure that you guys are aware that we will be tweaking a little bit things here and there to just get the look proper. So we just did the basic thing right now, and now we be setting up the basic shaders, and then we set up the lighting, and then we go into more detail about shading. And in the meantime, I'll probably add more assets and maybe add a few parameters and nodes in between. So be sure to check out the video and follow it closely, because we will be changing assets here and there. So let's get going. Alright, so normally how I work, I start with a simple material. So I'm hitting N to jump into the material context. And then in here, I create an Arnold material builder. And I want to just rename this to base. Jump in here, create a surface shader. And this one is our basic material, which is already set up to be a point. Oh, sorry, that's actually not correct. Do one here. And then we just want to change the color to be 18%. So 0.18 and a roughness maybe of 0.6. Like that. And I do want to store this as a preset. So save preset, actually save it as a permanent preset. So this is my base 18% reflective material. And now this is applied here. And what I want to do, I want to go back into my object shape here, and I want to go to render and drop in this material, which we do have in material like that. So now we do have a shader applied to everything. So next up is lighting it. So this is what I typically do, is assign a base shader and then light it and then do the shading after. So what I want to do, create an Arnold light like that. And I just want to switch this light to be a area light. Actually, let's do a disk light, and then hit enter to get the move handle, and maybe move it up like that. And then let's maybe angle it upwards a bit more. And then we just want to hit R for rotate and just rotate it down. So it's roughly looking at our main object here like this. And then we create a camera as well. So let's do that first by framing our guy and going maybe to something like this for the framing. And then we just hit Control click on the camera, which creates a camera in view. We can change the type of we can change the camera view to be taller than height, which I like always to do. So let's go 1600 by, what do we do? Maybe do 1200. And then we can change our focal length to be maybe 85, even maybe 105. And then we just move it slightly to the side, like that. And this would be our framing, which is perfect. And then we can hit our, let's go to the basic lighting mode and then hit save. And then we go to our outputs here, which is in our, which is in ROPS. And then we just create the Arnold node, which is our render settings. Let's see what is set up here. I changed the Houdini version, so all my default presets are gone. Not bad, but let's just switch this to maybe 2.1.1.1. And then I think everything else is quite good. I just want to restore a few CPUs for streaming or recording the screen. Let's do 32. And then we want to make sure that we have precision. This is for rendering it later. And then we want to do auto crop. We want to go into our, where is it? Here, make sure the color space crop is enabled. So this is our for textures. We don't have textures, but this is just something I set up by default. So let's just save this as a permanent default. And now I'm good to go. So go into the render view and hit render. And as you can see, we see nothing. And that's just the reason because we don't have any exposure to our light. So let's go back to our objects, go to our light and maybe increase the intensity exposure to 8. And now we can already see we do get some nice lighting. Maybe go to 9 to push it up even more. So that's 9 stops. And now we can change our spread, which is essentially the cone angle, maybe 0.2, which is now way more angled and gets more exposure. Maybe go down with the exposure and reduce the spread even more. You can see now you can already get this nice cone shape. I think it's a bit top lit. So let's just create a new viewer here. Viewer, let's see. I think I always keep forgetting what it is. It's Alt 2, I think. Well, I don't know. All right, so we do have this. So as I said, we want to do a few things. So first we want to change the size. This grade is maybe to 0.1 so we get nice and sharp shadows. And what we also want to do is just rotate it down a little bit more by hitting rotate and just rotating it down. You can see now we get this nicer fall off towards the top. It's a bit much. Let's see what this brings us. Okay, I think this works quite well. We will get more lighting and shaping to everything. So this is essentially the basic setup, I think. We can go a little bit side lit. So let's look through that light. And then just rotate it a bit to the side. Maybe like that. Oh, let's do it again. And make sure you lock it. I keep forgetting that. And then we rotate again. Like that. So now it's more side lit, which gives us a bit more shaping around those spheres. So that's pretty cool. All right, so now let's stop the render and do one more thing. So we want to create another geo group here and call this ground. Jump in here, create a grid like that. And then looking through our camera, just make sure it's filling the view quite nicely. So let's just increase the size essentially and maybe move it back in Z. Like that, maybe a bit towards the x-axis. All right, so this would be our ground plane, which does not have the shader yet. So what we want to do, we go into the material context, duplicate this, and let's call this just ground, and maybe make this a little bit lighter. Maybe go 0.5 and reduce the roughness to 0.2. Go back to our objects here, and then we just assign it. Let's go to matte ground, and now let's render again. Now we should see some bounce light, hopefully, filling in the dark shadow areas. You can see it's not as much as I expected, but we will see. Once we change all the lights and change all the shaders, we should get something more. All right, so now let's assign unique shaders for these boxes and for the wires and for the spheres. So what we want to do, because it all lives in one object, you have two options. You can either create material nodes in here, or you can create different render objects. It's up to you what you want to do, but essentially all you got to do is create a material node in here, like there. And we don't have it yet, but I will just be picking base, and I'll just call this styro. It doesn't exist yet, but we'll create it in a little bit. And these will be the threads. So let's rename this to threads. And then we do have on the right the box, right? So let's just call this one box. So we have now 3 materials. And obviously it's complaining because they don't exist right now. So let's just head over to material context, duplicate this 3 times. So one is styro, the next one is threads, and the other one was it box or boxes? Box. Okay, so we've got box, threads, and styro. Okay. You can hit Alt left and right key to jump back and forth between your previous context. And now let's do styro first. So I'm just doing it blindly just because I roughly know what I want. So let's go maybe to 0.7 for the brightness. We do want to make them a little bit more shiny, maybe 0.3. So this is our base styro. The threads, I want to have a translucent effect. So I want to make sure that the transmission is 1 and the color is 0. So let's do color 0, transmission to 1. And we do want to have some kind of roughness, maybe 2.25 as our roughness for our transmissive object. And for the box, I want to do something yellow, but not too yellow, so it's in your face yellow, but something around it. So maybe go 0.6 in intensity, pick some yellow red, and just maybe give it a saturation of 0.2, just to see what that gives us. Roughness should be maybe 0.3. And then we still need a base ground. So in the ground, I do want to pick a material. So I do have a texture. So let's just hook that up quickly by clicking file name and then browsing to your material. So I have now these 3 textures. So one is diffuse, bump, and roughness. And before we want to make sure that we do have UVs, which I don't think we have on the ground. So let's go to objects ground and create a UV texture, which just generates us UVs on it. We can do a quick shade to have a quick look how they look. They look good, nicely uniform, so that's all good. Yeah, so let's head back to our material context. And this is our material. If you want to check them out first, we can obviously just hook up the RGBA to the surface directly. And we can also go up to the object context just for now and just disable the gallery and then just hit render to see the ground itself. And this is what it looks like. So let's go back to materials and let's go to ground. We can rotate it and see what we get. I think I do want to rotate it in the object context though. So let's just jump in here. And I think we can angle it by 90 degrees, rerun it. And now they are angled this way. We can change the scale here or in the textures. I do want to do it here as well. So let's go maybe 2 in the scale, which should double our resolution. So now we have way more tiles to work with, and I think that is pretty good. So now let's head back to our to our material context, go back into the ground, and now let's work with those shaders. Or if you want to see the other ones quick, let's just hook them up as well. So RGB goes in here. So this would be, I believe, our, our roughness, and then we do have our bump, I guess. Yes, so for the bump, create a bump node, quite straightforward, and just hook up the red to the map and then go from the vector to the geometry normal to connect the bump nodes, create a range to control our roughness maps as well. So the R goes into the input and the output goes into our specular roughness. And then we can connect the base to our base color and then hook up the shader. And then we should have something already nicely working. Obviously, it needs way more fine tuning, so we'll reduce the bump map to 0 for now and play around with the specular roughness. I believe it's way too dry, too rough looking. So what I always like to do, hook up the ranges to our surface shader and then play around with the values. I want to enable smooth stepping to clamp the values so they don't go below or above 0 or 1. So now I want to change our input min to add more contrast to this map, like so. And reduce the output max to maybe 0.5, so it's way more shiny, but the minimum should be not 0, it should be 0.05. So we are defining the minimum and maximum output ranges like that. And then we do have our texture, our bump, so let's hook these guys back up. It's still hard to see because we have nothing reflecting in this environment, right? So let's go back to our object context and make sure we enable the gallery, and let's hit render again. Right, so you can already see that something is happening. Way too bright. We see some reflections up top, but it's not there yet. We still need to bevel our edges and we probably need to add more bounce. So you can see this is how the process is. So let's maybe render just this region at the bottom. Go back to our material context, ground, and play around with the ranges. So let's reduce our output max to maybe 2.3. So we have it way more shiny. And the bump is not helping much, but I think it will be better. Next is some noise to break up our surface. And we create another bump like that. And we then hook them up together so we have 2 bump maps working together. So the vector goes to the normal, and now we have 2 stacked bump maps. You can see what's already happening. This is exactly what I want, but just not as strong. So let's reduce it maybe to 0.05, just to get these nice subtle bulges. We can add a bit more distortion, maybe 0.5, to break up the noises even more, just to have a bit broken up floorboards, which is quite good. We can maybe try increasing the scale, something like that. And then we need to reduce the height. It's just too much still, 0.01. I think that works better. And we still fix this. This is way too bright and the boxes are not working yet. So let's head over to our objects, go into the gallery and look at the boxes itself. We do have the mountain, but we don't have a bevel yet. So that is something which is bothering me. So let's make sure we bevel those corners by creating a poly bevel. Like that. And then we just bevel it. And we want to make sure that we change the angle. We want to extrude by an angle, and it should be maybe 89 or 80, 85 to only capture the top, like the 90-degree edges. Maybe do 2 divisions here. So now we have a nice sharp edge. And for the poly wire, I think this is just fine. All right, so now let's get up a directory, and in the gallery itself, let's just go to the Arnold tab here and enable subdivision to 1 iteration. And let's just see what this brings us. Okay, so we do get a nice box now. It's nice beveled edges, and you can see there's some kind of offset. So that's exactly what we want. So now let's work a little bit on the spheres. I think they are a bit too white. So let's go into the material context, go to our styro and work with this here a little bit. Make them also a little bit yellow. Like that, and then reduce the intensity of them so they're not super blown out. Okay, and then let's head over to the threads and change them as well. Maybe increase the roughness for those guys. I think that works better. Okay, with increasing the roughness, you can see we get way more shaping around everything. You can also reduce the IOR maybe to 0.3, so it's not bending the lights too much. And now let's just increase our render settings to get a better grasp of what we are dealing with here. All right, so this was rendered now in a bit higher settings, and you can see now we get the nice cleaned up floor. Everything looks a bit more polished. So what I forgot to do is change our view node from sRGB to P3D60, which is my monitor, which gives us already way more light to everything. So you can see now we get more information in the top here. So this already looks quite nice. So what I want to do, still a few things to change. I think the bump here is flipped, so we want to change that. So let's head to material contact, go to the ground, and in the image here in the bump, let's just actually we don't have it on at all, so maybe let's add it. Yeah, so now we get actually a better view of the ground. So we did not have a bump, so maybe reduce it a little bit though. Yeah, so that's better. And what I also thought is that our box here is a bit too dark, but then I thought also the ground is too dark, so I was thinking actually to push up the light intensities. So let's just go back to our Arnold light and maybe go up 1 stop, which should make everything a lot lighter. But then also I want to increase the spread so we get a little bit more range, and also increase the size of the light a little bit, maybe 0.15, which gives us softer shadows in the back here. But then increase the cone angle or the spread to 0.2. Which makes it dimmer, but it reaches more. So everything should be a bit wider. You can see we get more light on the ground. Maybe it's a bit much. Maybe try 1.75. Yeah, I think that works a lot better. You can see it got a bit brighter everything, which is cool. What I want to do too is I want to change the material of the ground a little bit. I think it's a bit too desaturated. So let's create a color correct node in here and hook these guys up. So let's do that. Input, output, and then just increase the saturation maybe to 0.2, 1.2. You can see it's got already a bit more orange, maybe 0.3. I think that's better. And I think now it's a bit too glossy. So what I want to introduce now is just a bit more range here. So maybe 0.35, just to soften up the floor a little bit, maybe 0.4. Yeah, I think that works nice. maybe also increase our distortion bump to 0.2. Let's see how that works. And you can see everything is a little bit more fine tuning here. But I think that works quite well. It's still a bit glossy, so maybe try to increase the bump. Yeah, I think that's a lot better. All right, so now let's just focus on our threads here. I think we can introduce a little bit of hacking just to get a subtle amount of shadowing here. And what happens is, as it's set up right now, it's fully transparent, which means that it will not cast much shadow. So what I want to do, I just want to reduce the transmission maybe to 0.8, which gives us very subtle shadows on the ground. You can see now it's definitely a bit darker. Maybe 0.8 is too much. But it does do the trick, actually. Maybe it's just perfect. We get the shadowing of those threads on the box. So we have a nice contact point. And I think it's still not too dark. It's still see-through enough to see those balls. All right, so now what I want to try is we'll work a little bit on the shader on the styro balls and maybe make them a little bit more, like add some sheen to them. Let's see if that did it. Make it a yellow sheen. All right, not too much. Just to give them some kind of reflection component to everything, so they're not just as a white simple sphere. Maybe increase the roughness too. Maybe go on 4 or 5. And I think that works quite well. I think what we can do too on the box here is just increase them a little bit more. Maybe go back to objects and go to the gallery box here, and then have a look at the mountain sob, which is happening here, here, and maybe go 0.45 and maybe increase a little bit of the roughness and see how that is. Okay, so the ground is nicely broken up. Now I think that works quite well. We can maybe try to make it a little bit darker. And you can see it's always a back and forth here in all the components. So maybe go on to the value and maybe try 0.5. Or even lower. Yeah, I think this works actually quite good. So now it's more broken up. I changed the roughness slightly. So now let's just see what kind of guy we want to use here. So maybe head back up to our objects here, go back into the gallery, and see if we want to use this guy. And I think we do. So I think it's just a bit more, it's hard to see what this is, I think. Let's just use this. And if you want, you can rotate it too. So you can add a transform. And I think nothing should change much. You can maybe rotate it by 20 degrees. And you can see the boxes are still aligned the same way. It's just the insides which are changing. Maybe go 30. Okay. All right, so now let's render this guy and go back up into our prop context. Make sure we specify our output to be EXR. Goes to the right location. Let's call this main. Maybe render this with 8 samples. And what else do we need? We don't want to denoise it. I think we have everything we need. So let's just render this, and then I see you in compositing. So while our digital art pieces are rendering, I first of all want to thank everyone for your continued support on my channel, and I really enjoy all the feedback and comments I'm getting. It really motivates me and keeps me going. And if you also want to follow along, I do offer some mentorship and also the source files of these scenes on my Patreon channel, which you will find the link in the description below. So I would highly appreciate it if you can have a look at that as well. So enough plugging here. So let's just get back into Nuke this time and get going with the compositing. So let's make sure you guys check it out. All right, so we are now in Nuke compositing. I just brought in the EXR file, and I'm using Nuke just because I want to do a little bit more operations that is available in COPS, so I'll be just staying in here. First, what I want to do a grade node just to lift the black slightly. It's a bit too crushed for my opinion, so you can use the lift here to just bring it up. You can see that's what it's doing. But what I like to do is use the toe operator, which it does a similar thing by just lifting the blacks up a tiny bit. You can see now this is what the toe is doing. it just adds this nice, what you would say, this Instagram fading. Just a slight amount to just get some kind of haziness or dust to the environment. What I then want to do, I know this is not the best thing people like to see, but I like to use chromatic aberration in a very, very subtle amount, which just helps to split out the RGB components based on the lens distortion. I just want to probably reduce this a little bit, and I don't want to blur anything, so I just want to try to keep it as crisp as possible. Now let's do a reformat here. It seems to be kind of weird. And make sure you also view it in P3D60 because that is what my monitor is set to. Obviously it's different for you a little bit, but this is what I set it to. Maybe the toe is now a bit too much. Let's go 0.1. Okay, that's better. And then we have the chromatic aberration, which just gives us the little bit of separation. And what I want to do is use exponential glow, which is just a glow node, which just gives a little bit more haziness and dust to everything. So in the pre-grade, I want to preview it, and I just want to grade it a little bit or gamma it down at least to just get these really hot areas separated. And then we can make sure we clamp the whites. Actually, let's see, we don't clamp it for now and just see what we get. And then let's go out of the preview mode and you can see what is happening here. But this is the glow right now. You can see it's quite strong, but this is pretty cool. And we can just, in the post grade, we can just gain it down. So we just added a tiny, tiny bit. Just to add this feel of there's some kind of things in the air, like some smoke machine or something, just a little bit of glow, which is quite nice. And what I want to do then, I want to add a grain on top. It's called a regrain node, which just mimics the kind of the camera noise you get by dark environments with a higher ISO. You can see it's colored noise. Again, this is too strong, but the idea is there. So I'm just reducing the gain amount just to break it up a tiny bit. Like, that's a bit much. So I'm not sure exactly how good it is to see, but I can see there's some noise in here. This is now what we had from the render, which is this. And then after a little bit of comp, we get to this point. I think the chromatic aberration is a little bit strong. Let's just have those values so we don't get as much blur. And sometimes what I like to do is add a lens distortion node, which is probably happening before the chromatic aberration. And then we just want to play around with the values just to distort it slightly. I think we should go this way, but let's just do it the other way. And see now we don't have straight lines anymore. It just mimics the distortion of a lens would do. And then we can go to the final render. And this is now what the distorted image looks like. I'm not sure if my distortion values are correct. Probably not, but I still like the distortion which is happening. And if I compare this again to our final render and to our to our final render and to our final comp. So comp versus render, and you can see how much the comp does. Maybe we added a little bit too much glow, but I still like the idea and I still like this moodiness to everything. So this is my setup for this art gallery, and obviously you can just render as many pieces as you want. Alright, it's a wrap. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I tried to section up nicely so we have modeling, lighting, and compositing. So be sure to leave a thumbs up, and I will see you guys in the next video.